Today we're going over the first part of the nervous system, and then we're going to follow up with 2 more video lectures on the nervous system. And before we continue this, I want to go over a concept of what muscle memory is, and it's because I've had this question in every single class, and this being an online class, you don't really have a lot of opportunities to ask me questions. And so muscle memory, what we also know this as is motor learning. And really, it's all these tasks that we do that are stored as memory through repetition over time. For example, the very first time you learn how to ride a bike, it's going to be very difficult for you to know how to balance, to get the coordination of your movements. But after a while, now you have this muscle memory because everything becomes second nature. You don't even have to think about it. Your body knows how to engage. Your core knows how to engage, balance itself. You know when to push down on the pedal and which side to push down on for the coordination of movement. Same thing with typing. So I know some of you might be fast typers, some of you may be slow typers, but this idea of being able to know where the letters are, when you think of typing right now, saying the word muscle, typing out the word muscle or memory, on your keypad, you know exactly where those letters are. It's because you've done for a very long time. Same thing with dancing, knowing when you want to plier, when you want to jeter, or do different movements on the dance floor. Okay, you can do that easily because you've learned it before and now it becomes second nature. So pretty interesting about that. Another thing I always get questions about is, well, when do you consume creatine, and do you take amino acid supplements or protein supplements, and when should you take it? And so I found the journal article, and it's about creatine and when you should take it pre or post workout. And so according to this article, you should be taking your creatinine right after your workout. And so why is that? Well, it has an increase in lean tissue mass. Other things it does after you after you work out, taking your creatine after, you will increase your muscle fiber size, increase the number of myosin heavy chain synthesis, activate satellite cells, and satellite cells we're going to learn later on down the line. These are going to be used to help ensure, then replenish and maintain the health of all of your nerves and your neurons. And they also increase concentrations of the ATP that's found within your muscles and also phosphorylated creatinine. So we saw already creatine, very important to be phosphorylated because it's that quick energy source to give to our muscles. Okay. So we're going to start off by looking at Chapter 7, the nervous system. And to give you a little background, what exactly are the ways that our body can communicate with each other? We actually have 2 main systems. So we have this nervous system, which is a quick, fast-acting system. It has a very rapid response, but it's brief in duration. And we have the endocrine system, which is a very much slower response, and it has a longer durations. And so if I want you to think about right now, you know, you're driving your car. Let's just imagine you're driving your car, and you hear a siren going, right? So what are you automatically going to do? Probably going to pull your car over, right? And you're going to wait and let the siren or the ambulance pass, or if it's a policeman, hopefully it's not the popo coming after you, right? You're gonna pull over towards the side. Now, nervous system, that quick, fast-acting response, what did you do in response to that noise? Good, you pulled over. So that's an example of this nervous system response. It's that rapid, quick response. So rapid response, and it's brief in duration. Endocrine system, we mentioned already, it's a slower response. And it has a longer duration. And how is it that this body is able to communicate with itself? Well, a lot of these, the way that we dictate, we have all these glands that are part of the endocrine system, and a lot of these are dictated by our central nervous system. And so it's a slower response because we're going to tell our body to produce some hormones, such as your growth hormone, within your reproductive system, you have testosterone, you have estrogen. These are going to help the maturation of your secondary sex characteristics, like the deepening of your voice if you're a guy, also the maturation of your breast tissue if you're female, and also the sperm and also those oocytes. And so that's a much longer time. You can't take that, all doesn't happen within one day. So that's why endocrine system, we can communicate, send the signals from our brain towards all of these organs. Rapid response, brief duration, all these signals are going to come to our brain. We're going to use our nerves and our neurons to communicate with our muscles and glands to create an output to respond to that stimulus. Now, when it comes to this nervous system, we have three different components for this. We have a sensory input where you gather information. A lot of that's going to be from your external environment, but also from your internal environment. And by doing this, you're going to, what's the function? We'll gather information, but you're going to monitor changes occurring inside and outside of your body. And what these are collectively called, all of these changes, both inside and outside, these are stimuli. And what are you going to do? You're going to respond to that stimuli. And how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to send all of this information, gather. So you're going to gather all of this information, all the stimuli. Where you're going to bring it? You're going to bring it to your integration center, which is going to process and interpret all the sensory input and decide what actions need to be done. So sensory input in our last example, we had the siren. Integration center, we know this as our brain and spinal cord. And what are we going to do? We're going to process and interpret all that sensory input and decide what action is needed. And so in response to our siren, what do we need to do? We need to pull over. So we're going to eventually tell what muscles to pull over. And so what are we going to do? We're going to tell that all these instructions to our motor output. And so motor output is a response to all the integrated stimuli. And this response will activate muscles or glands. Here in our example, we heard our siren, sensory input. Integration center, we need to pull over. What are we going to do? We're going to use our arm muscles to push the steering wheel over. To the side of the road. You're also going to press on your brake pedal to start decreasing your speed. Here's that example. So here we have sensory input. What are different types of sensory input that we have? Good. So we have the vision. You have hearing. What other senses? So you can think about all the senses that you have. Good. So you have touch, taste. You also have smell. Okay, so the great example I like to think of is smell. When you smell those malasadas, what do you think of? Integration center, you think of, there's something yummy. So integration center, this is going to be the brain and spinal cord. One more time. And the motor output is only going to be one of two things. These are going to be our muscles or our glands. Now, of course, we can do a couple of things. So if a popo is, or a police officer, is chasing after you, let's say you're going 90 miles per hour, you're probably going to get scared, right? You're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? So what's going to happen to your respiratory rate and your heart rate? Probably going to elevate. And so motor output, not just your skeletal muscles, but also has to deal with your smooth muscles as well. So within your smooth muscles, examples, your diaphragm can start contracting faster, increasing your respiratory rate. Also, your heart's going to start beating faster. So your cardiac muscles, those are going to start beating faster to allow more blood flow towards your brain to let you be more active, more responsive, and then also more blood delivery to your lungs to have more oxygenated blood. Okay, if we look at our nervous system, we're going to notice that our nervous system is broken down into two major types. We have the central nervous system dealing with our brain and our spinal cord, and we have the peripheral nervous system, and this deals with nerves. Okay, so here is our body. So brain and spinal cord, central nervous system. And because our brain and spinal cord are only situated in one area, how are we going to be able to communicate with our muscles and our glands? All that's our peripheral nervous system. So all that extensions from our brain and spinal cord towards our muscles and our tissues. Okay. Looking at the central nervous system, 2 organs. I'm going to see this over and over and over again because probably going to be on your exam or your quiz. And the function is it works as your integration or your command center. Integration, so you're integrating all of your sensory stimuli, all those special senses that we looked at, and we're going to interpret all that incoming sensory information. And we're going to issue outgoing instructions. So it works as a command center because there's those intelligence officers, operations. They are going to take all this information and then in response give instructions to and how to respond to those instructions or respond to all that incoming information. Peripheral nervous system, these are the nerves that extend from the brain and spinal cord. Spinal nerves, just like in the name, it's going to carry impulses to and from your spinal cord. Cranial nerves, these are going to carry impulses to and from the brain. Function, so these are communication lines among your sensory organs, the brain, and spinal cord, and glands or your muscles. Okay, this is that main communication highway. Now if we look at this afferent and efferent division, we're going to bring information towards our central nervous system via all of these nerves, and we can bring all that information to our muscles and our glands from our central nervous system through our nerves by this motor division. So sensory is afferent, so this is going away from all those sense organs. Motor is an efferent, it's going back towards those muscle and glands in response to your sensory input. Okay, so looking at these 2 principal subdivisions of your peripheral nervous system, you have that sensory afferent division, in which case the nerve fibers will carry information to the central nervous system. An example of this is going to be your somatic sensory fiber. So somatic deals with your skeletal muscles. And also you have your visceral sensory fibers. And these are your internal organs. Then you have motor or efferent, and we're going back from the integration center towards our muscles or our glands. And so carrying those fibers or impulses away from the central nervous system. Now you notice as we come back from our peripheral nervous system, when we're going to innervate our muscles and our glands, our muscles are composed of 2 major categories. We can either have voluntary muscles or we can have involuntary muscles. And because of this, our motor division of the peripheral nervous system can be subdivided into 2 major systems. We have the somatic nervous system, in which case we're going to cause a contraction of skeletal muscles. And we also have the autonomic nervous system, in which case we're going to cause a contraction of cardiac or smooth muscle glands. And so this one, it's involuntary, meaning that we have no control over that. Okay, so let's look at this right here. And our autonomic nervous system, because this is all involuntary, we're looking at our cardiac and smooth muscle glands. We can cause a contraction of these muscles, whether we're in a state where we're very excited. Let's say that you're about to run a marathon. What do you think is going to happen to your heart rate? Good, it's going to increase. And what about your respiratory rate? Good, it's also going to increase. And so because of this, we're going to increase cardiac muscle, we're going to increase contraction, we're going to increase smooth muscle contraction. And these collectively are going to stimulate another branch of our autonomic nervous system, and that's going to be our sympathetic division. Now, other times when you don't need an elevated heart rate and you don't need a lot of contractions for your smooth muscles, when is that time? Okay, so when you're digesting, so after you had a long meal, a lot of you tend to fall asleep or you want an afternoon nap. Okay, and so your cardiac contraction rate is going to decrease, but your smooth muscle glands are going to increase. So we want to increase all those digestive organs, the activity of those digestive organs, in which case we're going to stimulate this different branch of our autonomic nervous system, and that's going to be our parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so here, autonomic nervous system, we're only talking about the involuntary branch of the muscles, because we're all talking about this motor output. So two systems with opposite effects. We have the sympathetic division. This is going to be mobilized during extreme situations. And because of that, we call this the fight or flight division. If you are in the position where you're going to fight somebody or fight an animal, I don't really know of an animal, but you know what I'm saying. Or if you're going to flee, so flight, you're going to run away. You're just like, no, I'm cool. I'm not going to go fight this animal or this person. You're going to flee the situation. What are you going to do? You need to mobilize yourself. You need to increase your respiratory rate, increase blood flow towards your respiratory system, your cardiac muscles, right? And you're going to decrease your digestive activities. You don't need to defecate. You don't need to urinate at this time. You want all that blood flow to go toward that skeletal muscles and the muscles that actually need you to flee that situation. And in this case, that influence in the body, as we mentioned a couple, you're going to increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure. You're also going to increase glucose. Why do we need to increase glucose? Good, ATP. Increase blood flow to your heart. Brain and skeletal muscles. And examples, so fighting or fleeing a situation, if you are excited in a fight, want to fight somebody, fear, and also when you exercise. Parasympathetic division, this is known as the unwind or rest and digest system. In which case, during this situation, do you want to expend energy? No, you don't want to use your energy. You want to save it. So this one, you're going to promote normal digestion, conserve your energy, this is when you have elimination of feces and urine. What happens to your heart rate, blood pressure? All going to be decreased. So decrease blood pressure, heart rate, and respiratory rate. And so not only just decreasing them compared to your sympathetic output, but also these are going to be at more normal levels. So I'm just going to go back over here really quick as we clean that all up. And for your exam and for your quizzes, be familiar with these different branches of the nervous systems. And so remember, nervous system in general, two main branches, central and peripheral. Central deals with the brain and spinal cord. Peripheral deals with all the nerves communicating from taking all that sensory input towards our brain and spinal cord. Motor division is going to bring all that after integration at our central nervous system. We're going to bring that motor output to either tell our somatic muscles to contract, so looking at our skeletal muscles, or regulating the control of our autonomic nervous system muscles. And so with autonomic nervous system, depending if we're in a flight or fight situation, we're going to stimulate sympathetic or parasympathetic. Good, sympathetic. And for rest and digest, we're going to stimulate our parasympathetic. The next category we're going to look at are the nervous tissue, specifically their structures and functions. And in our cells, in our nervous system, we have the main special type of cell called neurons, and we have supporting cells to ensure that these neurons are well myelinated and that we don't have any debris surrounding them. And so our main cell is our neuron. These neurons comprise our nerves, and these are the main cell type of the nervous system. Comprising the nerves. And their main function is to transmit electrical messages. And really, they're able to do this at a longer distance. And so in one area, we can receive a message, and we can transmit that message down this long region called the axon. And then we can continue that message down here to another neuron. So we can either have another neuron down here, or we can have our muscles or our glands. And so looking at our neuron itself, we have two major regions. We have the cell body. Cell body is composed of our nucleus, and it's also our metabolic center. And then we have the processes, which are extensions from the cell body. And here we have these long extensions. These are called dendrites. And dendrites receive incoming messages from either the sensory input, or we can receive other messages from other neurons. They receive messages from other neurons, or receive stimuli. Second type of process we have is this longer region here, and this is called the axon. And this is used as a communication, and so once we receive and integrate that message right here in our cell body, this is a conducting. So it conducts the message from the cell body to the next neuron, gland, or muscle. And so not necessarily the gland's going to receive a message, but it can stimulate glands to secrete its secretions. Here's an image of a neuron within our body. Here is the cell body of the neuron. And here you can see lots of dendrites extending from that cell body, and the neuron's going to receive all those messages, whether it's going to continue, if that message is strong enough. Once we have the cell body receiving all that signal, we can send it down our axon and have that message get carried on to the next cell, muscle, or gland. Okay. Looking at these axons, we'll notice, I'll just draw it over here. So here are our dendrites, here's our axon, and down here we have the axon terminals. And where have we seen axon terminals before? Good, we saw them in Chapter 6. And so really, Chapter 6, we looked at how we had this neuron. We receive that message down, so it's in the form of an action potential. It's going to receive that signal to stimulate, send it down our entire axon, and then it's going to get received here at our axon terminal. And then if, remember, that signal is strong enough, it's going to release acetylcholine. And then down here, we have enough acetylcholine receptors, enough sodium is going to come in, and we're going to have an action potential along our sarcolemma. And really, these neurons, that's what we're looking at right now, how they can communicate and receive those messages from the central nervous system or a stimuli, and then bring it down to these later targets, whether it's a muscle, your gland, or another neuron. And so axon terminals, we already saw this, contain vesicles filled with what? So acetylcholine is one type of it, but it's all types of neurotransmitters. And they're separated from the next neuron by a gap. And so these are called synapses. And these are gaps between, or junctions, and then we also have what we saw between a neuron and a muscle cell. We have a synaptic cleft. And so these are the gaps between adjacent neurons and muscle cells. And we saw how important these neurons are in conducting over long distances, and so we want to make sure that they are going to be supported. And so that's the role of these supportive cells, or we also collectively call them neuroglia. And so 3 major functions. First one is for support. Second is insulation. And 3 for protection of all the neurons. Protection. First one we're looking at are astrocytes. Think of them, astro being star. So star-shaped cells. And what these do, they brace the neurons. So here's a neuron. So it's helping to brace the neuron and form barriers between capillaries and neurons. And here's a capillary bed, and there's a neuron. And by doing this, can also help control the chemical environment of the brain. So functions. It braces the neurons and forms a barrier between the neurons and the capillaries. And then second, it controls the chemical environment of the brain. Second type of nervous tissue support we have microglia. These are spider-like phagocytes. So phagocytes are anything that can engulf and destroy anything foreign. And so what these do, they dispose of debris. Oops. Ependymal cells, what these do, these lie in the cavities of your brain and spinal cord, and they're very critical because they will produce cerebral spinal fluid. Now, what is cerebral spinal fluid? This is that cushioning support fluid found within surrounding our brain and within our spinal cord. And anytime somebody has an infection or an infection within their cerebral spinal fluid, that can lead to what's called meningitis, and we can get a spinal tap. And so it's pretty much when this cerebral spinal fluid, it's going to be found within, if that bacteria or anything that's the pathogen is going to be found within the cerebral spinal fluid, you can take a spinal tap, and then that's how you can determine if there's something wrong in that. Function of this, so we produce cerebral spinal fluid, but also these ependymal cells have these finger-like projections that allow in movement. So these are ciliated to help the movement of all of this cerebral spinal fluid within the cavity, so it's nice and circulating, and we can replenish that. Oligodendrocytes, these are important for the central nervous system because they produce myelin sheaths for the neurons in the central nervous system. And what myelin is used for, it's for the conduction of all those electrical impulses and messages down the entire axon to occur at much faster rates versus an axon that's unmyelinated. So it helps with that conduction of the message. 2 other cells that we have satellite cells. What these do is that it protects the neuron cell bodies. And then we have Schwann cells that have the exact same purpose of oligodendrocytes, except that this is found in the peripheral nervous system. So it helps form myelin sheaths in the peripheral nervous system. And what else that helps for is for the movement, the conduction of those messages from our central nervous system towards our motor output. Or also the alternative too, right? So you can take sensory information and bring it to your central nervous system. Let's go into more depth about what these myelin sheaths are and what they really are. They're white fatty materials covering these axons, and they're produced by all those supporting cells. Covering axons, and they're produced by supporting cells. And so once again, Schwann cells are for peripheral nervous system, oligodendrocytes, myelin sheaths around neurons found in the central nervous system. Now, one thing that we have here, which we didn't go over, these are called nodes of Ranvier. And what these are, they're gaps found in the myelin sheath that are along the axon. I'm going to go back to the slide before, and I'll show you what these gaps are. And so here you have a message, and it pretty much the message can jump, so it's called saltatory conduction. We don't really need to know that term, but because you have these gaps, you can allow sodium ions in. We're going to go over what generates this action potential, or this electrical charge impulse down our entire axon, but it allows those messages to kind of jump from one of those myelin sheaths to another, and that's also, these gaps are those nodes of Ranvier. Looking at this picture, I just want to show you that all this neuroglia and our neurons are all intermixed with each other. For example, here you have your astrocyte, and that was to that brace network between your neuron and your capillary bed. Okay, so this is just to show you that. Now we're going to look at the anatomic organization of our central nervous system, and we have the first thing, these are called tracts, and tracts, those are bundles of nerve fibers in the central nervous system. And these tracts are organized to form what are called our white matter and our gray matter. And if we look here, all of this white matter, all of that is collection of myelinated fibers in the central nervous system. Here, if we look at our neuron, which part has a myelin? Okay, good. It's all of this axon. And so a lot of this myelin is going to be composed of all of those axons. Now, what about the gray matter? Gray matter is a collection of mostly unmyelinated fibers. I'm looking at this, what's mostly unmyelinated, all the cell bodies. And that being the case, if you look at your cross-section of your brain, white, all the myelinated axons, and all this down here, the pinkish or gray area, that's going to be the cell bodies. Looking at the anatomic organization of the peripheral nervous system, we have the groupings of our neuron cell bodies outside of the central nervous system, and these are called ganglia. And typically so far we've seen our neuron in this structure, in the shapes, such that we have this cell body here, we have the axon down here. However, there's other different shapes and forms that our neuron can come in. For example, we can have dendrites coming in this direction. Here's our cell body, and then here's our axon going to our axon terminal. And as an example here, our spinal ganglia outside of our central nervous system, here's all the cell bodies. We don't see the large extension down here, and then the other end, these axons going towards our spinal cord. Now, what are nerves? And nerves, these are bundles of axons, so bundles, multiple neurons coming together, supported by connective tissue. There are spinal nerves, and those are the axons stemming and going to the spinal central nervous system. And then you have cranial nerves, and those are those nerves that go to and from the brain. And now let's continue looking at this idea of all those afferent nerves and bring all that sensory input towards our brain. And so here we're going to look at a couple, and these are sensory, so we're going to look at specifically those found within our skin and also our muscles. The first one we're going to look at, so carries a sensory input. To the central nervous system. First ones are going to be the free nerve endings. These are found here within an epidermal layer of our skin. Second one we have here, so this is for pain and temperature. Second, we have our Meissner's corpuscles. These are for touch, and so these are found within the dermal papillae layer. Of our dermis, also for touch, so deeper pressures there. And then next we have the deeper pressure receptors found in the reticular layer of our dermis. And these are lamellar corpuscles, and we also call them Pacinian corpuscles. And so putting your hand on something much larger, putting pressure on that depth of that pressure is sensed here and received by our Pacinian corpuscle, and we're going to send that down here, axon, all the way down towards and bring all that sensory input towards our central nervous system. Two that we have within our tendons and then also our muscles, we have proprioceptors. And as I remember, I told you when we were looking at chapter 6, and I said when you work out, people are also always wondering why is it that you start feeling pain after you worked out. Well, here are your muscle fibers, skeletal muscle fibers, and here are all those connective tissues, epimysium. And then you also have your perimysium, all forming eventually those long extensions to form your tendon. So anytime you work out, you create micro tears or micro rips along these connective tissues. And then, as I mentioned, you have inflammation to the site. So you want to repair all those damaged tissues. And then what happens when this becomes more inflamed? You start enlarging up this area, and that puts pressure against all of these receptors here. And that's how you get the sense of pain. And we're going to bring that all towards our brain and spinal cord. Same thing with your muscles. As you work out, you're going to create micro tears within your actin and your myosin and also the connective tissues around it. And what's going to happen? You're going to have inflammation to that site. So that's one way we can start repairing those tissues that have been damaged. So looking at sensory afferent neurons, these are going to carry, again, those impulses from your sensory receptors to your central nervous system. And then proprioceptors, these are going to detect stretch or tension. Oops. We looked at already those sensory neurons, and the two that we haven't gone over yet are the interneurons and the motor neurons. Interneurons, these are going to be found whether within the brain and spinal cord, and then these are going to, as a function, connect your sensory and motor neurons together. And then finally we have the motor or efferent neurons, in which case they're going to carry those impulses from the central nervous system to glands or muscles. And this last part we're going to cover is this idea of a reflex. And so what reflexes are, they're rapid, very predictable, and involuntary responses to a stimulus. Stimulus. Okay. And it occurs over pathways called what's called a reflex arc. And so here we have the dendrites. Those are going to receive those different signals. Here we have, for example, we have those Meissner's corpuscles, those different corpuscles. It's going to sense all those incoming information. Whether it's going to be pressure, pain, or temperature. And we're going to bring all that information down into our sensory neuron. So everything in blue is going to be our sensory neuron. Integrate that into our cell body. And then remember, we have multiple, not just that one dendrite found within the skin, but we have lots of those dendrites found within the skin. So we can have multiple of these neurons coming together. All of their cell bodies also coming together. Collectively, all their cell bodies will form this big, large extension outside of our central nervous system, being that ganglion. And then here we're going to combine not only just that one neuron, we can have multiple neurons, and collectively these form those nerves. Now here we're going to bring that message towards this neuron found within our brain and spinal cord. And that's going to be that interneuron. So it's going to take all that sensory input and it's going to connect it towards a motor neuron. Now here it kind of looks like in a reflex arc, what a reflex arc is, it does not require any integration within your brain. And so really it's this quick, fast response because all it is the sensory information. It goes to your interneuron and automatically you have a response. And the great example for this is every time you go to the doctor, when they hit your knee with a hammer, and you see your reflexes there, and also your reflex of putting your hand, immediately contracting it to pull your hand away from a hot source. And so here you have this interneuron, but at the same time, how do you perceive pain and those different things? Well, this interneuron can communicate with other neurons that send that message up your spinal cord towards your brain. Okay, so that's a different type of neuron. Now here, from our interneuron, we're going to go to our motor neuron. We're going to send, so it's going to receive all these messages at these dendrites, integrate it within that cell body, and then immediately send it down its axon. It's very short. Send those messages out through those axon terminals. Now here at those axon terminals, we can send out neurotransmitters to your next neuron. Here, the motor neuron is the next neuron. It can receive those neurotransmitters, and if that stimulus is large enough, it's going to receive and integrate all that information in our cell body. Then we're going to send it down our axon. And then when it gets down here to these axon terminal, we can release more neurotransmitters that will cause our muscles to contract or our glands to secrete a substance. Okay, so I know this is a lot, but we're going to go over it again in the next video lecture. I just want to give you an introduction to that right now. Okay, so looking at this reflex arc, there are 5 different elements. You have a receptor. You have a sensory neuron, which we also give the term afferent, the afferent pathway, afferent neuron. Then you have this integration center. It's going to take all that information. You go through the motor neuron. It's that efferent pathway because we're going away from our central nervous system. And then we can cause the contraction of our muscles or our glands to secrete a substance. There are 2 different types of reflex arcs. There's a 3-neuron reflex arc and there's a 2-neuron reflex arc. And so in this case, it's going to consist of 5 elements. So we first have that sensory receptor. It's going to react to a stimulus. Oops. And the one we're going to go over through the next couple of slides is a flexor or withdrawal reflex. And this is just for withdrawing your hand, your arm from a source. And so here is an example. We have a needle piercing our skin. The receptors feel that pain. This needle has penetrated through our skin. So we have that touch, pressure, and also pain receptors that we can sense that. We have that sensory neuron carrying that message to the integration center. We have this integration center over here that processes the information and directs the motor output. And then we have the motor neuron, which carries a message to an effector. And then finally, we have the effector organ, which is the muscle or gland to be stimulated. And then here we see an example of skeletal muscle, but once again, remember, depending on if it's going to be involuntary or voluntary response, it can either be our vessels, our glands, or it can also be our cardiac muscle. Okay, two neuron reflex arc. This deals with two neurons, and then a great example for this is the patellar or knee jerk reflex. And this is what I was talking about when you go to the doctor's office. And so with this, you're going to have your sensory or your stretch receptors going to see and sense the pain. Remember, we have those proprioceptors found within our tendons. So you're going to stimulate that. You're going to send that message down to your afferent neuron. And then we don't have an interneuron. Okay, so automatically once that message is received here at our axon terminal, we're going to send out all those neurotransmitters to the cell body of our next neuron, and that's going to cause and initiate an action potential down our axon. Then our ventricles will contract. So it's going to go down our motor or efferent neuron until it reaches our effector organ. So once it reaches here, these muscles are going to contract, and that's going to elevate your knee. And so because of this is a two neuron reflex arc, this cannot be controlled consciously. And so it can help determine whether or not there's some damage to your spinal cord or any nerve damages you have. And so that's it for the first part of Chapter 7, and I'll see you in the second part of Chapter 7.